Hey everyone, Leanne Vogel here from healthfulpursuit.com, and you are watching the Keto Diet Podcast. Today is episode 302, and I'm joined by Magdalena Wszelaki, and we are talking all about estrogen dominance. This is a huge topic for women. If you are a woman, you need to listen to today's episode. It's a really, really good one. We learned a bunch about our liver and supporting our liver detoxification pathways and the importance when it comes to estrogen dominance, our metabolites, how all of that works, signs that we're estrogen dominant, what estrogen dominance is. It's a really good episode. I can't wait to share it with you. And before we do that, I just want to thank our two sponsors for today's show. The first is Bel Campo. They make the most beautiful, amazing meats. They got pork and they got chicken and they got lamb and they got beef, and they're all grass-fed and organic and delicious and amazing, and you just need to try them. So I'm going to include a link down below. And last but certainly not least, like ever, is Eaton Hemp. They make CBD products that actually work. So I'll include a link down below with a coupon code there, and let's get over to the show. Hi, Magdalena. How are you?
I'm doing really well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, it's good to see you, and I'm so impressed that you're on a boat and yet you can do this every time.
Right? Yeah. Lots of coordinating required. Today we're going to be talking about estrogen dominance, which I know a little bit about. In my case, I'm more lower in estrogen, but we were talking before starting this recording, and you said you can still be low estrogen and still be estrogen dominant. So I can't wait to learn from you today. And I'd love to just start off. I started with your bio ahead of this, but I'd love to just get in your words who you are, what you do, what you're passionate about, to get us started.
Yeah. So, a lot of times we start telling our story from the time we were diagnosed with something pretty dramatic. And for sure, for me, this was in 2008 when I was living in China. I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's disease, and which is an autoimmune disease that affects the thyroid. But I could also feel like I had a whole barrage of other things going on. I certainly had estrogen dominance, which we're going to talk about, the symptoms, and I just didn't know I had it back then. But really, when I look back at my life, there was just so many things that led to that point, because your hormones and your immune system don't just fail in 2008. It all typically happens 10, 15, 20 years prior. And, for me, it was like a perfect storm of being not being a breastfed baby, having put on antibiotics right for the first month, and being in a hospital for extended periods of time, always having a lot of skin problems and a lot of eczema, psoriasis, a lot of then as a teenager covered in acne. I didn't realize back then it was all because of food sensitivities, and all these food sensitivities were causing horrendous digestive issues. I was chronically constipated. When I stand sideways, I looked like I was 3 months pregnant after having a latte or having a, pasta. And it was, and then later as an adult, being a competitive athlete and getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go training, and then, working in advertising and going, working till like 9 p.m. and then going for drinks with friends. And, it's just like, sometimes when I think about it, it's like, what was I thinking? But it's just like that perfect storm of digestive issues, genetic component to it for sure. And lifestyle really choices, right? Of not resting. And I used to say I'll sleep when I die, so this was 10, 12 years ago when I had a major career change, 12 years ago. And that's when, I started Hormones Balance and developed my own platform that I run today called Hormones Balance. It's a platform to helps women balance hormones naturally. And like a lot of us in this space, we start on doing this work because of the passion and mission that we got on because of our own health, right? And so I had to figure it out. Mind you, 10 years ago, in 2008, so 12 years ago, there was no resources like today that you can just go on Amazon and buy a book from Isabella Wentz about Hashimoto's, and you can look up my stuff if you have estrogen dominance. There was no such resources back then. And so I think many of us have just gone through the whole process of creating that for ourselves. And then you realize later, wait, it's not just me having Hashimoto's and problems with estrogen. There is millions of other women, right? And so that's really what led me to this point. And, fast forward, I'm 40, when we're recording this, I'm 48 years old, and I definitely feel better than when I was 28, in terms of energy levels, quality of sleep. I don't have anxiety attacks anymore. I don't have issues with my weight. I don't have issues with brain fog. And so, a lot of changes obviously have happened. A lot of it is to do with nutrition, lifestyle changes, just really honoring the body, listening to the signals that it's giving us. And so here I am today.
You just described my 20s. Well, basically my life also, just like I'll sleep when I die, waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go for a 4-hour workout, just all those things. And you're right. When we're dealing with a health issue, it's usually not what we did in the last year. It's what we did 10 years, 15 years, 20 years before. Now you mentioned estrogen dominance, and I did also in the intro. I'd love to just for you to describe what estrogen dominance is.
Yeah. So, in the past few years, I really pivoted my entire platform towards really talking about estrogen dominance a lot more, because from the symptoms I'm going to mention in a second, you realize that there's almost no women listening to this podcast who doesn't suffer from this, and no one is really talking about it is as much of a comprehensive, loud voice as I'm doing right now. So let's talk about the symptoms, right? Is anything from like the very, let's say, visible things, like, for example, the fact that you might be struggling with your weight around your hips and your butt, right? And you hit the gym and you change your diet, and yet the cellulite and fat, your typical pear-shaped kind of a woman. Well, guess what? Pear-shaped women tend to be very estrogenic. And so if your tendency is to put on weight in that area, you probably tend to be more estrogenic. And that could be genetic elements to it, versus, let's just contrast this to someone who was an apple shape, right? That person tend to have a bit more of a metabolic issue and have high testosterone levels or DHEA levels. So that's, and then everything from, if you're having these red varicose veins that are really popping out on your face, and every time you go to get your facial, your facial lady is telling you like, oh, you've got these red, we can do all sorts of cosmetic procedures on them, right? That doesn't really solve the issue. You still are having, that's the sign of estrogen dominance. Let's talk about some like the women's stuff that's going on. Anyone who's got period issues, so whether it's a very heavy period, whether it's period that's absent and it just shows up whenever. So you have highly irregular periods, or you have incredibly painful periods, so much so that you were in fetal position. And that was me, always being out of school for the first day of my period, or at work in a fetal position with, 5 Tylenols throughout the day in order to get you through the day. Those are all signs of, they could be definitely estrogen dominance plays a big role. Women have fibroids. I mean, it's one of the most painful emails that we receive from women who had a full hysterectomy, even a partial hysterectomy done because of fibroids. And then later finding out, my website and saying like, oh my God, I didn't realize I could have done these 20 different things pretty easily to shrink that fibroid, right? And so, Western medicine's answer to fibroids is obviously to either watch it and then if it's growing or if it doesn't shrink, then to remove the uterus. For a lot of younger women, endometriosis can be a sign of estrogen dominance, combined probably also with inflammation and an immune component to it. The thing about the changes we're going to talk about later, all of that is going to help things like endometriosis. It's one of the most painful conditions a woman can have. I remember this is 20 years ago, my roommate had endometriosis, and they induced menopause in her. She was like in her mid-20s in order to help her manage her pain, right? And what happens with menopause? You were basically suppressing estrogen. It was the estrogen that was causing it. And it's not the excess of estrogen. So let's talk about that later, but it's how you break down that estrogen that really matters. So, those are some of the big ticket items. And I would say also a lot of things like, for example, women having a lot of anxiety, having sleeplessness. You suddenly, especially for, those listeners who are like 45 and above, you suddenly, you're always a very good sleeper. And suddenly the minute you hit 45, you wake up in the middle of the night and you just can't go back to sleep. And that's also another, that could also be due to estrogen dominance in a specific form that's due to too low of a progesterone. So it's a one type of estrogen dominance that can happen. So, I mean, you tell me who doesn't have some of those conditions in some way or another, right? I mean, it's almost every woman in your life who's struggling with those.
And you mentioned brain fog earlier, that you're not living with brain fog. Was that because of the estrogen dominance and getting that under control also?
I wouldn't attribute brain fog directly to estrogen dominance so much. It's more to do, I think it was taking care of my Hashimoto. So low thyroid conditions generally cause a lot of brain fog. So I would attribute that more towards the fixing the thyroid.
And do you find that with estrogen dominance, like you just said, are there other hormone things at play sometimes where it's kind of just there are multiple other things, or maybe a couple other things, as opposed to just one thing, which is estrogen dominance when it comes to hormones?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's a really important question because your hormones don't work in isolation, right? It's like this perfect orchestra that is playing together. And if you've been to a bad concert, like maybe in high school, that's in the midst of a rehearsal, that if the trumpet guy screws up, right, it's like everybody else is kind of domino effect on everyone else. And so with the hormones is exactly the same way. So estrogen a lot of times is connected to thyroid conditions. So I'm glad you mentioned that. A lot of times, what's interesting is that when you have high estrogen levels, or especially some of those dirty estrogens, those high metabolites that are not beneficial to us, what that causes is it elevates the thyroid binding globulin, which then binds up a lot of the thyroid hormones. So basically, the short version of it is that high estrogen can lower your thyroid function. So yes, absolutely. You can also have, estrogen and progesterone are like two dancing partners, and they are kind of sparring constantly together. And so, when you have low progesterone, which is something that's very normal for women going into perimenopause, or even just the fact that you're hitting that 40 mark, and especially 45, like any woman will say that, from the minute they reached 45, just everything changes in a body. And a lot of it is to do with hormones, right? So progesterone and lowering progesterone coming down definitely makes estrogen dominance even more pronounced. This is the reason why, one of the big symptoms I forgot to mention is the estrogenic cancers. And so if you think about it, like breast cancer, uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, and lung cancer in non-smokers are all driven by estrogen. So you're talking about 85% of cancers in the United States is either estrogen receptor positive or progesterone receptor positive. That means that estrogen or progesterone, but most of the time is estrogen is the culprit, is what drives the proliferation of the cancer cells in the breast. Lumpy breast, fibrocystic breast are also due to estrogen dominance. And so, to your point about what else plays a role, I mean, that is it really is a whole combination of a lot of those factors.
Brilliant. And so we were talking a little bit ago, and you mentioned it also as describing things. How can you be estrogen dominant, but still have, maybe you go to the doctor and they test your estrogen, estradiol usually, and it comes back as low, and you're like, okay, not a problem. Could it still be a problem? And how do you know? How can you be low and high?
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about that. That's a great question. So, we have a quiz on our website that has got 7 sections, and it's basically trying to assess 7 different hormonal imbalances. And one of the sections is that measures, hypothetically, measures low estrogen, and the other one is about estrogen dominance, right? So then when a person gets the result, and I cannot tell you how many women we have who email us saying, your quiz sucks. Like, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because you're telling me that I'm low on estrogen, which is true because I'm going through like massive menopause right now. But at the same time, I'm showing signs of estrogen dominance. For example, I'm finding lumps in my breast. I've developed an estrogen receptor positive breast cancer, right? Because remember, breast cancers most of the time don't happen in young women and happen in older women. So the question is, older women, their estrogens and progesterone, generally all hormones go down, right? How can you get breast cancer when your hormones are low, right? And this is where the explanation of estrogen dominance comes in. Even though, and so the answer to, so it's not like our quiz sucks. We did a better job in explaining it in the answers. Not everybody, of course, reads them. But since I have your attention here today, let me just explain that even though your estrogen can decline, the way we're breaking down those estrogens make a difference. So let's just pause this for a second, and let me give you like a very visual comparison. Or an analogy here. Imagine you're sitting by a river, and there is this river that's flowing, and there's a bank in the middle of a river. And this river goes through the bank, and the bank splits up the river to clean river and a dirty river, okay? So in the body, guess what? The organ that is like the bank in the middle of a river is our liver. And so the liver separates those good estrogens. So those are like the beneficial metabolites. We call it metabolites because it's basically what happens in the liver. You're breaking down those estrogens to, and just for simplicity, I'm just going to call it clean estrogens and dirty estrogens. And those dirty estrogens are the problem. And the more taxed your liver is, the more of those dirty estrogens you're going to have. And guess what? As we age, it's pretty normal that our liver gets kind of taxed, right? Especially if you don't support it regularly, you don't do a couple of detoxes, or don't do your castor oil packs, you don't poop on a regular basis, all of that is gonna clog it up. And hormones are gonna be the first one to suffer from it extensively. So let me just circle back to your question. So does it make sense now when I say that even though your estrogens drop, the way you're breaking them down, even the little that you have, how we break them out is still done in a way that is you're producing too many of those dirty estrogens. And that's the reason why women with breast cancers are often low in estrogen overall, yet they have breast cancer. The second reason it can happen is that there is another form of estrogen dominance, which is basically the comparison of, is basically the amount of progesterone there is to oppose estradiol specifically. So you mentioned estradiol. Estradiol is like there's various types of estrogens that we know a lot about, the three. So the one you mentioned, estradiol, is the most aggressive form of estrogen. And it's not too, Leanne, I just want to say, one thing I don't want people to do from after this podcast is to demonize estrogen. Because let me just say that you need estrogen to function as a woman. We need it for our cycles. If you're still cycling, we need it for, and even if you're not cycling, for good mental function, for your bone health, for your cardiovascular health, to have nice plump skin that doesn't sag. All of that is the job of estrogen. So let's not demonize it. It's just the nuance is, like I said initially, think about the breakdown, how you're breaking down those estrogens. And the second thing is, how much progesterone do you have to oppose that estradiol, which tends to be very loud in most women. And that's something that, again, when we look at an average woman after 45, not just estrogen drops, but progesterone drops too. But guess what? Progesterone drops a lot faster than estrogen, a lot faster. So maybe in your 30s, you were like fairly balanced estrogen to progesterone. But as you age, even though they both drop, you have like so much of estrogen, but you have like that much of progesterone, like tiny bit. And that's the reason why when women go on bioidentical progesterone or do certain supplements that helps them naturally boost progesterone, it can create really great results.
Brilliant. Oh my gosh, you're just fantastic. I have so many questions. I guess the first one being the metabolites. I know that there are tests to test how many metabolites you have. Would it be fair to say that the less metabolites you have, the worse off you are? Like, you kind of want a balanced amount, but is it good to have more metabolites than less metabolites?
It depends. No.
Okay.
So you just want them broken down in a good ratio. And these metabolites are always going to be there. Your liver is always going to be breaking them down. The question is how much. And there is tests like, just in case your listeners are curious, my favorite is urine test called Dutch, DUTCH. A lot of functional doctors can order that, and that shows you how well you're breaking down estrogens, and which ones are the problematic ones and which ones are the beneficial ones. So yeah.
Okay, so it's all about the ratio, less about the amount, but just having the ratio. I believe there's 3 main metabolites, right? And if the ratio is off, then that's what the concern is, you're saying.
Correct. It's a 2, 4, and 16 hydroxyestrogen. Like if you want to go more technical, and 2 and 4 are the problematic ones. 16 is the safe one. So it's basically how much you, and the lab will have markers to show you what is the safe level and when is too much. And I will say, just on testing, because that's a common issue, when I was in private practice, and you kind of alluded to that as well earlier, about how you get your lab work done, your blood test, and then it comes back and you're like, oh, and your doctor's like, oh, it looks great, like no problem. And when I was in private practice, I remember women coming with their blood work for the steroid hormones, such as estrogen, progesterone, and saying, look, looks perfect. My doctor says I have no problem, right? And this woman is like, fibroids, she's got a history of breast cancer, her period is all over the place, she's got like the severe bleeding, like she bleeds for 20 days a month, right? But she's told there's no problem. And so the problem here is that you do not measure your steroid hormones. So like things like progesterone, estrogen, cortisol, DHEA, testosterone, you do not want to measure that through blood. Blood is a very, very ineffective way of showing you anything. That point is great for thyroid, is great for other hormones, but not for steroid hormones. So there's just a word of caution, because it gives you a false negative.
So what I'm hearing you say so far is that proper testing is key, and understanding your symptoms are key. If you go in for a test and then it says you're low and you're like, I'm fine. But if you're having all these symptoms that you've listed, that's also a red flag. You mentioned a little bit ago, just in passing, dirty estrogens. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so dirty estrogens are the metabolites that are causing all these symptoms we're talking about. So they are the ones that attach themselves to the receptors. And for example, like in a case of breast cancer or lumpy or fibrocystic breast, which so many women suffer from, and again, we are told like it's perfectly normal, right? Like come and watch and see what happens. Let me not also forget thyroid nodules. For those women who have thyroid nodules, that's also due to estrogen dominance. And what are we told? Like, just wait and see and come back in 6 months. And then, it doesn't go away. You remove your thyroid, right? And then you're on thyroid mats for the rest of your life. So, so those metabolites that you were asking about, they are the ones who work on a receptor in proliferation of the cells, whether they are just malignant cells or they're cancerous cells. And so, that's and the fascinating thing is, because it might sound a little bit disempowering thing, like dirty estrogens, what do I do? It's one of the biggest aha moments I had in my own journey was when I went to see a functional doctor. I was so lucky. This was like probably about 7-8 years ago. And she said to me, you've got to look at because I was super estrogenic. Like we ran the test. It wasn't Dutch, because Dutch wasn't around back then. We had some saliva testing done, and it was already indicative of a problem. And she says, you need to work on your liver. Like your liver needs some serious TLC. And here's a fascinating thing is there are a number of different liver pathways, the phase 1 liver detoxification, phase 2 liver detoxification. They play a paramount, role in really helping you neutralize neutralize those metabolites, or skew them more towards the positive ones, the beneficial ones, and not those pathogenic ones.
So why do you feel like this sounds so serious and quite, I don't want to say simple, but like the information is there. You've written a book on it and we have all these details. Why do you think this isn't talked about more? Like why are you the only person talking about this? Why aren't there tons of books about this? Like what do you think is going on? Like why? What are your thoughts on that?
I am not sure. I think it's like 10 years ago, nobody was talking about thyroid. And then suddenly, Dr. Karazian came up with a book, and then Dr. Isabella Wentz came up with a book, and then Ellen Christensen, and, one person after, I think it's just a matter of time before maybe somebody picks up the megaphone and starts talking about it. I mean, are you talking about like the functional medicine is not talking about it, or the Western medicine, like the conventional allopathic?
Yeah, more the conventional, like if we know that this is an issue. I mean, we know that there are lots of issues that they're not talking about, but I guess the
Yeah.
reason I'm asking this question is because many, many, many women, like the most common question that I get and email and communication that I get with people who listen to the show is, this episode was so good, but my doctor doesn't believe in it, won't support me. I don't know where to go. How do I do this myself? And when it comes to hormones, it gets very complicated very quickly.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need medical support. So I guess I just wanted to pick your brain on how people can move forward with that and feel encouraged to do the work that we're about to get into, of like how to do all of this.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's why I wrote the book, right? Overcoming estrogen dominance, something that you can do it at home and start it off with. One of the things I really love about estrogen dominance is the fact that um, it is, I feel like one of the easiest hormonal problems to overcome, far easier than, for example, PCOS or having Hashimoto's, which is so multifactorial. I feel like with estrogen dominance, you can get quick results pretty quickly, and we can talk about that. And so, to your point, why, I mean, this is like the same thing, like, why is there no answer to diabetes? Why are we putting people on metformin and other drugs and no one talks about, about diet change, right? I think that's pretty consistent throughout Western medicine. But anyway, I mean, that's why I've decided that, it's time to take charge. And for people who need medical attention, I would say work with a functional doctor. Even a lot of functional docs don't quite understand estrogen dominance as much, but just, maybe pick somebody who can do a phone consult who specializes in hormones if you feel like you need that. But I will say that, there's just so many things you can do before you even, like, especially if money is tight, right? And, a functional doc will charge anything from $300 to $900 for a session, right? Depending on where and who that person is. That you can save yourself that money just by doing the first steps on your own, just to see the results. And, it really is quite simple. And I will say, one other thing I just want to share with you before maybe we talk about solutions is that I have all the genes, and I talk about in my book, like all the genes that you want to look out for that you might have that really make estrogen dominance really, really bad. And I never really understood, why is it that most of the time I'm really good. I stick to an anti-inflammatory diet. I don't do caffeine. I don't drink coffee. Sorry. I do a tiny bit of caffeine, but no coffee. Alcohol is very much controlled. Right. And then I go to Italy, like I go to Portugal. Right. And like for that 1 month, I just go a little silly, like not even very silly, like just a tiny bit silly. Right. So it's like, maybe glass of wine every day, but it's like everybody drinks wine there every day. So I'm like, I just want to be like the Portuguese, right? And then I'm gonna have the pasta, like like a regular pasta from my grandma in Sicily, like, because she just made it at the back of the store. Like, I don't want to do gluten free. I just want to do like wheat pasta, right? And and I do this for a month, and I'm just silly for a month, and then I have like the estrogen dominance from hell. Like, my period is horrendous. My boobs are like swollen, right? I can't put my bra on. My mood is all over the place. I'm really mean. When I'm ovulating, instead of being like nice and whatever and sweet and open, I'm just like, right? And but here's the thing. And, ever since I did my genetic testing, and I remember the first person who interpreted that for me, she wrote and she says, because I was curious about something else. And she told me, she's like, you don't need to be concerned about anything. You just watch on your estrogen dominance, because you have a problem metabolizing estrogen, lady. And I remember, that, my God, it makes sense, because both sides of my family, my dad's sister passed away from estrogen and cancer. My aunt anyway, both sides of the family have deaths, women, from estrogen and cancer, ovarian, uterine, and breast cancers. And it's just suddenly there's this light bulb went off in my head going, oh, no wonder I'm so sensitive. I just have those genes that are just not metabolizing estrogen very well. And so, so I just want to share this with our audience, because some of us might be more prone to becoming estrogenic really quickly. And you just have to exercise some level of kindness and forgiveness towards yourself. you're just genetically built that way. I would rather know about it now. And, when I went to see my functional doctor I live in Boulder in Colorado, and this was like a few years ago. And I went there with my whole, printouts of labs, and then she's flipping through it while we were chatting. And she says, she's looking at my genes, and she said, "Have you had breast cancer?" I'm like, "No. Why would you ask me that?" She says, "Well, with your genes, 45 years old, by now, if you were like a regular patient, you would have had breast cancer by now." So I think I dodged the bullet just because I teach this stuff, and I didn't want to be like my aunts on both sides of my family. And so, so we need to put a little bit more work. Some of us do, but it's quite incredible how preventable and manageable estrogen dominance can be.
And there's so much hope there, it sounds like, to kind of have everyone listens to genes. We actually have an episode coming up talking about epigenetics and the control that we have over things to kind of know things so that we can action those things. And so I have certain genes where I know that if I don't eat a certain way or do certain things, it could be kind of bad for me. But, having that information, then you can make proper adjustments so that you dodge that bullet. And I'm really glad that you brought that up, only because sometimes when we're talking about these serious things, like scary stuff like breast cancer, people hear, "I'm going to get it. There's nothing I can do," but that's not what I'm hearing from you. So I'm glad that you really, I'm glad that you really, really highlighted that. And I think now is a great time to talk about like, what can we do to turn this around? It sounds like there are a couple things. One is the estrogen piece. One might be also helping with the metabolite balance. Can we just kind of talk about what are the steps we can use in addition to purchasing your book?
Right. I would say the first thing is, I suspect your audience are not that audience, but I will just say it anyway. If you're using any synthetic stuff, such as smells, such as perfumes that, from your Dior, and you're spraying it right here and you're spraying it on your thyroid, stop. Switch over to natural stuff, natural cleaning products. There's so many options right now. There's not an excuse not to do that. If you're having, the thing in a car, people go like, "Oh, it smells really nice." Those synthetic, what do you call that? Not purifiers.
I haven't used them for so long. I don't even know, but we're in a rental place right now, and it's like these little things. I take them out instantly as soon as we get in.
Right. And so please, if you use any of those kind of things, I mean, this is just loaded with, estrogens. Those are synthetic kind of estrogens that just really mess you up. And they are the ones that turn in the body to estradiol, that aggressive estrogen we talked about. So that's like the first thing you want to just do. Your cream, the thing that you put all over your body that gets straight into your lymphatic system, make sure it's just nice and clean. It doesn't contain any chemicals, any phthalates, any parabens in it, etc. That's like the basic thing. And then let's talk about supporting your liver. So there's some really cool things you can do to support your liver. And, I have a whole chapter in the book on the liver, but let's just talk about a few really simple things. The liver loves bitters. I'm an herbalist. And so, I love bitter just generally as a taste. Like I could feel like my whole body is just like, whoa, party time. It's actually so good. Parasympathetic nervous system engages, like, it's so incorporate some bitter foods into your life. So for example, instead of doing a lettuce in a salad, if you're chopping up a salad today, making a salad, toss away your stupid lettuce. Like it's got no nutritional value whatsoever. It tastes like water. So you have to put a lot of like flavors to it to make it taste like anything. Use something like arugula, for instance, which has got bitter qualities, right? Chop up some kale into it, again, which has got wonderful bitter qualities. And the other thing is that, any form of parsnips, radishes, just chop those up and then put them into your salad. These liver qualities, the minute your body is going to taste that bitterness, even in small amounts, it provokes production of a lot of really great enzymes, and those enzymes going to help your digestion, is going to support your liver as well. Anything that you do to support your digestion is going to support your liver. Then, the other thing about that are huge when it comes to the liver, as well as just binding up everything for those metabolites, those dirty metabolites, is cruciferous vegetables. So cruciferous vegetables is the brassica family. So anything from broccoli sprouts to broccoli, just broccoli head, cauliflower, arugula that I mentioned, turnips, rhubarb, not rhubarbs, but rutabaga, and then you talk about kale, collard greens, right? All wonderful vegetables. Those are the kind of vegetables you want to incorporate as much as possible. They're also going to help support the liver in metabolizing those dirty estrogens we talked about. The third thing I mentioned, which is a really interesting but controversial food, is flaxseed. The reason why it's controversial is because flax is full of estrogen, right? So here your listeners are going, why the hell is she talking about adding 2 tablespoons of flaxseed every day when we talked about estrogen being so bad? So remember what I said earlier is that estrogen is not a bad thing. It's just how you break it down makes a big difference. So flaxseed is actually really beneficial for anyone who's low on estrogen, for example. Might really feel like you're just having this real great energy that you get from those are called phytoestrogens, so naturally occurring estrogens. What I love about flaxseed is that it's got so many different properties. The first thing is that it gives you, so like we said, natural forms of estrogen, which is awesome. Second thing is that it is also, it's got lignans in it, and it's only not in flaxseed oil, but it has to be in the fiber, it's present only in the fiber. And what it does is, check this out, it blocks the receptors of those dirty estrogens. So in the cell, it kind of like closes the door saying, hey, estradiol, I'm not gonna let you in, go away. You need to get pooped out, right? So it basically helps you skew more towards the clean estrogens away from dirty estrogens. I mean, how phenomenal is that? The other thing is that flaxseed is also full of both soluble as well as insoluble fiber. So the soluble fiber is wonderful for all the prebiotic growth in your gut, but the insoluble fiber is like a sweep, it's something like a broom that sweeps through your colon, and it helps you with, it picks up a lot of those dirty estrogens again, but also it helps you poop better. One other chapter that I have on the book, which is also an organ that's really important in metabolism of estrogens, is the gut. But since we're talking about the liver and the gut are really combined together because actually they're all part of the same system if you think about it. The cool thing is that what flaxseed does is that fiber helps you poop better, and elimination, when you're eliminating, not only are you help supporting your digestive system, but also, obviously you feel so much better. Nobody likes to walk around constipated for 5 days, but you're also relieving the liver from having to recycle. Because when you're not pooping, folks, when you're constipated, you're basically recycling all your estrogens back and over and over and over again. And so having a really good bowel movement can be super helpful. Just 2 tablespoons of freshly ground, or I don't do it every day because I'm too lazy, but I would just grind up like a little jar, keep it in the fridge so it doesn't get oxidized, it doesn't get too warm. And then putting 2 tablespoons of that in your smoothie or whatever, you just don't cook with it. Because heat is going to destroy, it's not going to be good for the oil that's present in the flaxseed. So just do it, in your smoothie, or just having that in a glass of water. You put that in a glass of water, give it a bit of a spin, and then drink it up. So, really simple things like that can really make, like when you make a conscious effort to incorporate this into your daily life, it really can make a huge, profound difference. And, there's 25 other foods. If you want, we can post the link to where folks can download there's a whole list of foods. You can just make sure you incorporate that into your daily life, and it can make a really big difference in how you feel.
Yeah, we'll definitely include that link in the show notes. And as you were talking about flaxseed, why have I never thought to just add it to my drinking water? Like, I mix it in with some coconut oil and some salt, and I have it as a snack, and I actually really love that taste, but I've never thought to put it in my water. So thanks for that.
Well, one of the things that we have in the book is a recipe for using flaxseed in these truffles. And so instead of having to remember that, it's a very low sugar truffle, and then you just basically have the truffle every day, so that you are covered for your flaxseed, but also it's got some like cacao in it for magnesium, and you got giving the fiber, and you got a nice treat, so you don't have to, be going and looking for sugar.
I could totally do a truffle a day. I could definitely do that. So like, after incorporating these foods and following your protocols and such, how soon do you notice getting better? And what does that process feel like, look like? What's it like?
Yeah. So, it depends on the person, right? And I hate to say that, and people hate to hear this, like, oh, it depends. But I mean, for some, if somebody is menstruating and estrogen dominance manifests in form of menstruation being very difficult or present or absent, sorry, or too heavy. I mean, women start feeling the shifts with as quickly as within 2 weeks, and typically like a month of doing the protocol really helps. And I mean, we talked about dietary changes to really like amp up and speed up the process. I do recommend a couple of supplements that really speed up the whole thing. But I really, I use this like a pyramid in my book. At the bottom, it says it's a healing pyramid. So like, how quickly can you heal? And the bottom of the pyramid says food as first and always. Then it followed by herbs, which we have like all over the book, built into recipes. And then a third one says supplements, right? And then only on top of the thing, which says RX, so prescription stuff or bioidentical hormones. And I find that supplements. Is it okay if we talk about a couple? Because I know a lot of women who are estrogen dominant, like, have been put by including their functional doctors, on DIM. And I just want to address that because it does a lot of disservice to women. And so let me just frame this. DIM has been promoted in functional medicine as being the estrogen buster, right? And so like everybody is like, you've got estrogen dominance, okay, DIM. And so women take it and then they feel better either for 2 weeks, maybe a month, and then it stops. Some feel worse right away. Others have like no effect, no results whatsoever, right? So the point is that DIM in the long term might not work out for everyone. And the reason why that happens is because you need to understand the liver detoxification process, which is consists of two parts, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is DIM works on phase 1, and that's great. And it upregulates the first part of the detoxification pathway. But then what happens is in phase 1, all the toxins get decoupled, meaning they're like free floating. In phase 2, this is when we have all these different compounds that get attached to them and then carried out through urine, feces, and sweat, right? So when you don't have support in phase 2 liver detoxification, so you just upregulate it at phase 1, but then the phase 2 has got nothing to grab on to these toxins and evacuate them. And I'm specifically talking about estrogen here too, because estrogen also gets metabolized in phase 2 in 3 different pathways, in a methylation, sulfation, and glucoraphanation pathway. So you need some support for phase 2. And this is where 2 other supplements can become incredibly helpful. One is called sulforaphane, which is highly present in broccoli sprouts. Many of you might have heard, like women who have, for example, breast cancer, are put on broccoli sprouts extensively, and that's wonderful. I love that idea. The only problem with that is you don't know how much sulforaphane you're getting from these sprouts. And unfortunately, when we did testing when we were doing our supplement for sulforaphane, different broccoli sprouts have different sulforaphane values. And so some of them had very low and some of them had very high. So you just never know what you're going to get. So I'm a bigger proponent of, like, especially if you really have like something like breast cancer, ovarian cancer, you have fibroids, you want to shrink really quickly, to defer to a supplement, because then you know exactly the dose you were getting and you can work through it really quickly. So sulforaphane is one. The second one is called calcium diglucarate. And those 2 supplements take care of majority of your detoxification in phase 2. So, if you want to have a complete cycle of estrogen detoxification, taking care of all these metabolites, is DIM plus sulforaphane plus calcium diglucarate is like the trio that really helps. Thank you for letting me explain this, because I just didn't want everybody to kind of run off and get DIM, and then be disappointed that it's like, it worked for a while. Actually, women start feeling worse. And that's like the worst thing, that can happen.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. I actually just started working with a client a couple weeks ago, and she's been taking DIM for 4 years, and her doctor just put her on it, and that was the end of it. It's like, how long have you been taking it? She's like, 4 years. What else? Nothing. And I'm like, okay. Yeah. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. And where can people find more from you? I know I'm going to include a bunch of stuff in the show notes, including the quiz that you talked about, the food list that you talked about, but where can people get your book, connect with you, find your work? Tell us everything.
Okay. Really simple. My website is hormones with an S, hormonesbalance.com. And, and then the book is available now on Amazon. So just look for Overcoming Estrogen Dominance on Amazon. And if you want, I'll send you the link to the book on Amazon. And that's it. That's simple. And on social, if you just look for Hormones Balance, you'll find us there on Instagram and on Facebook.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing everything you know about estrogen dominance. And it was really, really great.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for hanging out with us today. I hope you really, really enjoyed today's episode. If you want to grab Magdalena's book, I will include a link down below. I personally can't wait to read it. When the show goes out, I'm sure I will have read it already. I'm going to get a copy a couple of weeks before it goes live, so I can't wait to read it. And if you do end up ordering her book and you have thoughts about it, feel free to DM me on Instagram. I'd love to hear what you have to say. You can follow me by going to Instagram and type in Leanne Vogel. Send me a DM and let me know what you think. If you're new around these parts, new to the Keto Diet Podcast, you can click on over there to watch or listen to all of my past episodes. I'm sure there are many, 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 many episodes of our 302 that we've done that will resonate with you. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you next week for another episode of the Keto Diet Podcast. Bye.